Come in from the crisp morning air outside. Come in wearing the autumn sunlight on your face. Come carrying the turning of the seasons in your heart. Whatever and however the greatness of life is speaking to you now, you are welcome here in our circle of friends. So today is the beginning, well, actually Friday kind of was a beginning of, what's that called? Fall break. My daughter's first kind of official fall break. And so she was with me, and I bet a lot of our families are out enjoying this beautiful weather this weekend. And I hope you all will afterwards. I wanted to talk a little bit about this question, which again, as I posed it earlier this week, I was talking more to young people. So welcome with me in my slight oblique, and questions here. But what I wanted to talk about today, and what we're going to be talking about in the sermon, is about this idea that all are welcome here. Because you might have seen this. We don't really have this posted, I don't think, anywhere in our congregation literature. I could be wrong though, but there's a really common phrase in a lot of communities. You may have been a part of one growing up. You may drive past one on your way here. Can you think of what it says? It's three words. All are welcome. Or is that right? All are welcome? Yeah. Okay, good. I think that's right. And it's a common thing. It's a big important thing that we say. But how many of you have ever been on the playground or at work or in a community of actors or in a community of any kinds of people? We know that sometimes the aspirations of what we say don't always match what happens out on the blacktop or at center stage. And so what happens is sometimes people get left out, and yet we don't put a caveat on the sign, right? It says all are welcome. And so it makes me wonder, is there sort of a missing asterisk or another word like we hope all are welcome, or we hope that we can do what is needed for you to feel welcome, or we hope that in time you will feel welcome here, or let's see, we hope that the things we do don't prohibit you from feeling welcome here. There's a lot of different words we could add to it, and it's not a sign of defensiveness to add these extra words or legal, like, covering our butts. It's actually more about being in more respectful relationship with who might come through the doors. It's actually like being more honest from the jump to say, we're really trying here, and we want to believe that all can be welcome here, that we can all feel a part of the family, but we know that that's easier said than done. And so part of talking about welcoming or inclusion is about acknowledging that there's a difference between what is and what ought to be, what the reality is and our aspiration, and to neither live in a despair of what is or just kind of the not yetness of our vision, so that we're not living in obscurity of, oh yes, of course, all are welcome here. So anyway, I think that as we talk more about it with some other kinds of big words in the sermon, I hope that we will start to explore what else we can do besides saying all are welcome, and how doing so could really make this a place that not only feels like a family, but truly a beloved community.
Wonderful. Good morning. My name is Brittany Phillips, and my pronouns are she, her. And along with having the great honor of serving as the office admin for UUCCI, I'm also the community coordinator for Tree of Knowledge Coven. And one of the ways that I serve the pagan community is by partnering with newly opened spiritual stores to offer free classes for those who would like to explore earth-centered spirituality. This has the double benefit of supporting spiritual seekers, as well as attracting customers for small businesses. Earlier this year, I was invited to visit a local pagan store that was in the process of setting up shop. And while the staff were busy stocking shelves and putting stickers on everything, I spoke with the manager about how the space could be used to offer free classes. And while talking, I noticed a cheery woman zooming and weaving between racks and aisles and shelves, holding out a lime green pool noodle in front of her like the handlebars of an invisible bike. I stopped to watch her finish a victory lap around the store before she shouted, "That'll do just fine." And she went back to stocking shelves. I imagine the manager sensed my confusion as she explained that the pool noodle is 3 feet wide, about the average width of a wheelchair plus a little elbow room. They had adopted the practice of noodling between the aisles anytime they moved shelves to ensure that a wheelchair could easily navigate their store space. And this experience shifted the way that I viewed the store during my tour. As I walked through the shelves, I imagined how a person of color might feel seeing runes on the wall, how a parent of a small child might feel seeing the brightly colored but very fragile statues at toddlers' reach, or how a blind person with a cane might struggle with racks of clothes that are wider at the top than they are at the bottom, where their cane would typically make contact before their body did. Now, I realize that putting oneself in other people's shoes is nothing new. But the image of this green pool noodle wielding shopkeeper comes to mind every time I'm planning an event, as a reminder to look at the space with fresh eyes and consider whether a space would be inclusive and accessible for all guests. So what does this have to do with UUCCI? This practical exercise in empathy extends beyond physical accessibility and is something that we can all do as members of UUCCI. Our congregation has already gone to great lengths in our goal of creating a space where all feel welcome and included. Because we have members and guests who are of a variety of sexual orientations, races, genders, ethnicities, tax brackets, and religious backgrounds. Our shared spaces, words during service, social groups, even our name tags reflect our values and our work to be a more inclusive community. We already do so much in an effort to be a welcoming congregation, but is it enough? We do so much already. Do we really need to do better? What else could we do? As Unitarian Universalists, many of us pride ourselves in being good people. And as I look out at my friends here today, I see hospice volunteers, members of the NAACP, human rights activists, recyclers, peacekeepers, tree huggers. If our congregation isn't good enough, then I don't know who is. So it may ruffle a few feathers today to hear someone up here stand and say, being welcoming is not enough. You may think, well, isn't it enough? Why wouldn't it be? I am a good person. We are a welcoming community. I helped a turtle cross the street and it was a snapper. What more do you want from me? While we do have plenty of laurels that we could rest on as a congregation, we already do so much, but we can do better. We need to do better as a congregation, not because we aren't doing enough, but because the task of caring for others is and will always be a growing edge. Consider what a welcoming congregation in the 60s might have looked like. Okay, while I'm sure they were doing a great job for their time, think about how far congregations just like ours have come in the last few decades. Think about where we could be, where we want to be in the next 10 years in 2030. How can we be more inclusive? What could our congregation look like? The work of creating inclusive spaces is an ongoing process that requires communication, empathy, and the practice of considering the perspective of others. Rather than thinking, we need to do better, we can ask ourselves, where do we want to go from here? How do we want people to feel when they are with our congregation? What small actions can we take to help others feel celebrated here at UUCCI? All it takes is a few small steps, a few accommodations, or a few kind gestures to let others know that we are safe and supportive as a community. So I invite you to consider, how would a trans person feel as they walked into our building to see a pride flag greeting them by the door? How would a person of color feel sitting in our sanctuary in a room full of members who just so happen to be white? How would a new guest feel while sitting in the fellowship hall enjoying coffee with all the noise and bustle? How would you feel if you were in their shoes? And what could we do to help them feel more comfortable and more included in this space? It is my hope that our congregation will continue to become more inclusive and more intentional in how we actively invite others in and celebrate them within our community. While it is impossible to anticipate every need, the important lesson of building an inclusive community is that there is no finish line. Being inclusive is not an afterthought or a task at the bottom of a checklist. This work of considering how our congregation serves our diverse community can be woven into every aspect of our shared work, even if that means addressing our own feelings about being good enough, or simply keeping a 3-foot pool noodle behind the pulpit. Today's reading is called The Promise and the Practice, Words Matter, by Carol Thomas Sissel. Diverse, multicultural, inclusive, welcoming. If I made a list of every single Unitarian Universalist congregation that I have served, visited, or worshiped at, they would have a few things in common, including the use of these words. Perhaps on the front of the order of service, or scrolling across the homepage of their website. Maybe they've been emblazoned on a rainbow-colored banner in the sanctuary. Wherever they are, more often than not, these words are proudly combined with another expression that has been embraced in everyday UU vernacular. All are welcome here. The congregations, churches, and fellowships on my list all have one or more of these words proudly on display. And I know why they are used so freely. Initially, I felt embraced by them. There's a warmth of recognition when my eyes first capture their sight. A sense of being acknowledged and valued moves from heart to head. And then a smile settles upon my lips. My heart blooms, and I feel that the welcome table has been set for me, and I am eager to pull up a chair. All of this takes place in an unmeasurable instant. In the next moment, it is tempered. I remember past experiences and unconsciously recalculate and measure my response. The petals of my heart close a bit, protecting the delicate stigma and stamen that lie within. Fear of disappointment rises in me like the sun. I love those words. I want what they promise, but I've been repeatedly disappointed. It is not simply enough to print them on an order of service or a newsletter. They must have meaning and intention. A desire for multicultural worship is wonderful, but it will not flower if that seed of yearning is not nurtured by a commitment and a plan. Longing for diversity of race, gender, or age is only a beginning. It calls for caring and creative programming. Our congregations are primarily white, female, and over 60. If we are to serve into the future, that must change. And I believe that we can transform first ourselves and then the world. I am injured repeatedly when we do not. When we use words just for the sake of using them, I am hurt. Without true resolve, planning, and measurable goals behind the things that we see, my trust and my hope are broken anew. Why does it hurt? Every time I see those words, I feel the possible revival of Unitarian Universalism germinating in the warm soil of spirit. I've seen the transformation begin to take place in Washington State, Washington, D.C., and California. Congregations in Oklahoma continue to push our faith forward. So yes, I am hopeful, but wary. On too many occasions and in too many spaces, these words and these ideals which they carry are given lip service. Words matter. They lift and hold us. They illuminate the future and shower us with possibilities. When misused, they hurt. Verbal cuts and abrasions sting, and language leaves wounds that become scars. Words matter. If you and your congregation are not ready to meet the promise you craft and share with the world, stop publishing them. Please don't invite me to sit at your table unless you have a warm, satisfying meal to serve. It doesn't have to be a gourmet feast. A potluck is fine. The souffle may have risen only halfway. The cookies might be burnt at the edges. The pasta might be overcooked. And that's okay. I'm starving. What it must be is filling, real, made with love, and ready to be eaten. Remember, I believe what you say and write. Words matter.
Last Sunday, we began our 6-week fall sermon series, which is now in the third year, exploring the newly affirmed shared values of Unitarian Universalism. Dr. Elias Ortega, president of Meadville Lombard Theological School, kicked us off with an exploration of transformation. And I want to thank all of you who were there to welcome him warmly to our community. I am proud of this congregation. I truly am. As I begin my Doctor of Ministry program at Meadville Lombard, I've been eager to share my love for this community and talk about all the wonderful people, all of you, and the programs here, about our rich history and our hopeful future we hold together in this place. As Dr. Ortega shared, we are indeed in a time of great change. Change upon change, change within our hearts, in our congregations, our local communities, change in our politics, at all levels of politics. Change within Unitarian Universalism as a living, breathing, transforming, liberal, and liberating religious tradition. And of course, change within our world, within this one fragile nature of which we are interdependently bound. Amidst this exponential change, we are faced with questions of survival and of despair, and he reminded us of joy, and how these realities we face challenge us in new ways. And I hope you can return to his words, whether on YouTube or in podcast or on my Substack blog when we upload it. Today, we are turning to another of our shared values as Unitarian Universalists, equity. Equity, like all of our shared values, requires careful consideration because, in my experience, as humans, we tend to adopt definitions that are somewhere between the true universal meaning, if there is one, of the term and how the term has come to be commonly used. It's sort of like that conflation of the terms literally and figuratively. So, for example, many people conflate the term equity with another liberal value. You might be thinking of it right now, which is equality, equity, equality, very similar words, just a couple letters different. I definitely have mixed these up over time. Even last week when we watched the very compelling video introducing the shared values with different hand signals to remember them. And do you remember the hand signal for equity was the sort of two fingers on the side, sort of looking like a equal sign. Equality is indeed related to equity, but equality is ultimately more related to an inherent belief and yet an aspirational commitment to our individual worthiness, that we equally are worthy of love. A belief we are all inherently worthy of not only love, but of care and of acknowledgement that we are each a blessing as sacred beings bound up with the sacredness of nature. Yes, equality is something we affirm as a point of both origin, our very nature, and perhaps final destination, where we are all headed. That's our universalist ancestors whispering in our ears. But instead of a dust to dust sort of origin or religion, we are more of a part of a love to love sort of people. We are born of love, and to love we shall return. The question then is in regards to what happens between the alpha and the omega of our valuing of equality, of balance. Well, to continue on the love train, I believe we are all called to love ourselves, one another, this precious world that is our home. We are called to love in this life, to contemplate the circle from birth to death, passing then forward to each new generation a guide for living. But here's the thing, the challenge we face is not whether to love in this life, but how to love in this life. The how rather than the what is where equity takes center stage. From a more general definition of equity, for example, as expressed in the Cambridge Dictionary, equity is the situation in which everyone is treated fairly according to their needs, and no group of people is given special treatment. Oh boy. Talk about a wrench. Equity is the situation in which everyone is treated fairly, not equally, according to their needs, and no group or people is given special treatment. This definition introduces new layers of complexity in our particular search, that is regarding how to love in this life, which includes questions of fairness or subjectivity and the respective needs of individuals or groups. So taken all together with the language of love at the center, here is how Unitarian Universalists have articulated equity as one of our newly stated shared values and commitments. Quote, equity. We declare that every person is inherently worthy and has the right to flourish with dignity, love, and compassion. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities, end quote. If this is a value that you hold and one that we wish to share together, we have to pay extra attention to these questions of how. How will we support the flourishing of all life with dignity, love, and compassion? How will we metabolize our time, wisdom, attention, and money to transform UUCCI, in our case, and Southern Indiana for that matter, ever more into a fully accessible and inclusive community or society? And I'll tell you the short answer. How we will love the visions of mutual flourishing and beloved community into reality is not through blanket, uniform, standardized, generic, nor one size fits all love. In other words, even though universal love may be the source and destination of all life, the journey of love, the journey of our lives, requires more time, wisdom, and attention, likely more resources as well, so that when we choose to love, we do so in a way that it can indeed lead us toward, or should I say, back to that one love that holds us all. Let's bring this forward into the problem or thesis posed this morning, namely, as the sermon title alludes, why saying all are welcome is not enough. You see, for me, when we are talking about any type of interpersonal, intra-group, or societal behavior, questions of equity are essential because we are talking about our sacred subjectivity, which means we are talking about differences, beautiful differences that make up this beautiful world in which we live. Wherever 2 or 50 or thousands or more are gathered, sacred subjectivity is there. That is, in other words, when we meet another human or any part of existence, we are meeting someone that is beyond us as individuals or as a group, beyond our own subjectivity, beyond our own subjectivity as a group. And as I said last month, we cannot treat the other we encounter as object. We cannot objectify them, but rather must extend that label of truth and worthiness that they have sacred subjectivity. So when we consider questions of encounter, especially in a semi-organized community such as UUCCI, we are usually talking about one of maybe three things. We may be referring to one, our internal congregational health and vitality, or how we are together. Two, our external social engagement, or how we are together in society. Or three, our shared capacity for transformation and adaptability, or how we are when the internal and the external worlds meet. The third notion of encounter is where the question of welcome, let alone the slogan, all are welcome here, emerged. It's kind of like the third realm of encounter is in the threshold, or literally or figuratively, the door frame where the two worlds meet, which is the focus of our attention when we reflect on how welcoming our community, like here at UUCCI, is to the outside world. It's very human in a liberal, progressive context, whether religious, political, or social, to aspire to the words, all are welcome. It is neither surprising nor negative to believe that communities such as UUCCI should be, or even is, welcoming to all people of all backgrounds. But the challenge we face is not in whether it should be, although that is a critical question for another day, but rather that it could be a place where all are welcome. And if this is a place where all could be welcome, well, then our time, wisdom, attention, and money or resources have its work cut out for them. You see, this gap between how we long for the world to be, or the ought, how the world ought to be, and how it is today is a painful gap, a gap that feels too large at times. So much so that we can strive for shortcuts to close the gaps between what the world or some segment of the world is and what it ought to be. Are you following me? So in regards to our value and commitment to be welcoming, we might look at the external world just beyond these walls and see such a divided, cruel, and unloving world where all, especially those with marginalized identities, especially those, do not always feel welcome, if ever. Indeed, we can look out and see large segments of society, let alone political leaders and even candidates for national office, outwardly call for the exclusion and deportation of groups, of whole groups within our larger human family. And when we see this division, this cruelty and lovelessness, we may say, we need to do something about this. We need to create a refuge where all may feel welcome and included into the loving embrace of others. We need to foster shelter from the storms of bigotry and discrimination. We need to carve out space where all may come in and all may thrive with dignity, love, and compassion. I'm right there with you. This world is very cruel. It can be lonely. It can be filled with despair. And so when folks find out about a place like UUCCI or a welcoming community of any kind, a huge sense of relief and gratitude and all sorts of emotions may flood their hearts. Perhaps all of you have felt these emotions at some point coming into this community, maybe your first time, but also maybe on countless other times since. You might be thinking of those feelings or memories right now. My colleague and friend, the Reverend Carol Thomas Sissel, who serves as one of the ministers of the UU Church of Alexandria, Virginia, wrote a very powerful and vulnerable testimony about not just entering into UU community as a lay person, as a member or visitor, but also as a minister, and a darn good one at that. Referring to words like diverse, multicultural, inclusive, welcoming, she shares those initial feelings you may relate to. Quote, I initially feel embraced by them. There's a warmth of recognition when my eyes first capture their sight. A sense of being acknowledged and valued moves from hearts to head, and then a smile settles on my lips. My heart blooms. I feel like the welcome table has been set for me, and I am eager to pull up a chair. But as a Black woman, she says she has to temper her heart for the gap that is often experienced in what follows. This is that gap between the ought, the aspiration, and the is, the reality. She reflects, quote, I love those words. I want what they promise, but I have been repeatedly disappointed. It is simply not enough to print them on an order of service or in a newsletter. They must have meaning and intention at their core, end quote. She goes on to try and explain why this gap in experience and among our hearts in community exists. And she does so at once incisively, vulnerably, and compassionately. Reverend Sissel acknowledges, quote, longing for diversity of race, gender, or age is only a beginning. It calls for caring and creative programming. Our congregations are primarily white, female, and over 60. If we are to serve into the future, that must change. I believe that we can transform first ourselves and then the world. I am injured repeatedly when we do not. Let me say that again. I believe that we can transform first ourselves and then the world. I am injured repeatedly when we do not. When we use words just for the sake of using them, I am hurt. Without true resolve, planning, and measurable goals behind the things I see, my trust and hope are broken anew. End quote. Reverend Sissel acknowledges that what we all know, being welcoming can be hard. Loving this world and ourselves, for that matter, is hard. This love demands of us careful consideration and time and wisdom to not just assume that all will feel welcome when they come through these doors, but to work tirelessly to make it so. And to be fair, it is so. This place is welcoming. That is, it is for some. We wouldn't come back week over week if it wasn't. We feel the love and embrace of this community, and we know that it isn't the same sense of welcome, love, and embrace that we each may feel. It is hard to know the heart of another if we do not ask, "How is your heart today?" It is hard to know the sense of welcome of another if we do not ask, "Did you feel welcome here today?" And it is hard to consider these two questions without also asking ourselves, how is my heart today? And did I feel welcome here today? Because it is not once you come in, you're in. Once you're welcomed in, you feel welcome. It is a fluid, non-linear process that is of feeling loved and welcomed in this life. And so it is true with being a part of a community that seeks to be a microcosm, a vision for the wider community, a vision of multicultural, beloved community where all may flourish with dignity, love, and compassion. Thus, we would do well to heed the invitation of our shared value of equity. As Reverend Sissel reminds, quote, "Words matter. They lift and hold us. They illuminate the future and shower us with possibilities. When misused, they hurt. Verbal cuts and abrasions sting. Language leaves wounds that become scars. Words matter." Our words matter and our actions matter as well. What if we embrace this call to equity, not just in a justice sense, but in a holistic community aspirational sense, within and beyond the congregation, and at that thin threshold between the two worlds? What would it look like for us to consider the matrix of experience of welcome and flourishing, of love and embrace felt within our congregation, including remembering those who came but once or twice, or maybe 5 times, who are no longer here? They disappeared. Why? What if we were curious and actively determined to use our time, wisdom, and resources to close the gap between the is and ought, and between those who expect welcome and experiencing something a little different? Could we possibly, through these reflections, consider ways to improve our sense, not just of welcome, but of commitment to being a community where care and belonging is centered? These questions require commitment, just as equity does, just as all of our shared values do. I envision our congregation to be so radically welcoming that we are willing to change the very culture of our community towards one that is more multicultural and embracing of all the ways we might show up with all of the ways we might long to be authentically, genuinely here in this place. Imagine 2030 is a series of pathways the board and leadership of the congregation is developing to help us move in such a way from all these different directions towards our future. And I hope as we continue to unfold these strategies and initiatives and programs, that you will see it as a responsibility of yours to tend to the thin veil between the cruelty of the world and the aspirations of the heart that manifest in this place. All of us can tend the fires that have been passed to us through the generations. Now it is our turn to lift up and welcome in the next generation of keepers of the flame of our shared faith tradition. I want to end with this prayer expressed in the song We Shall Be Known by Mamuse. May it be an invitation for us this day and in the days to come to not just believe that all must be welcomed into this circle of creation, but that we can and must be the ones who draw the circle wide enough to make it so. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now. And what a time to be alive in this great turning. We shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. May it be so, and amen.